Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the innovative uses of AI in software development. I'm Rachel Gibson, the Director of Sales and Marketing, and here with me is Jeff, our CTO, Steve Ives, who is a solutions architect in our services team, and Tim Bauguess, our Director of Software Development. Note that after this discussion, we're going to have some time for some Q&A, and then we'll share a very brief wrap-up presentation. In general, throughout this, we really hope that you all will ask some questions or add comments. The format of this panel is that I'm going to ask some questions. My friends here will answer, but if you guys have your own answers or your own 2 cents, please throw them in the chat. And I'm going to start with kind of a bigger picture question and then narrow it down a little bit and then end with a bigger picture question. So my question for you, gentlemen, is there is a lot of hype around AI right now, and that is very much an understatement. Do you think that the impact of AI is being overestimated, or do you believe it represents a transformative revolution comparable to the creation of the internet?
I'm going to jump in on this one and say I think that it is simultaneously over and underhyped. It's overhyped in that people think that every job will get replaced by it. And it's underhyped in that I think most jobs will change a little bit because of it, at least. Right? Like the stuff that I use it for, is actually relatively transformative for my job. The things that I'm able to accomplish with it are much more than the things that I was able to before it. So, I think it's going to change a lot of stuff, certainly, but probably not, going to bring about Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I use AI a lot every day, but I don't, and it's already helping a lot, but I don't feel that my job's being threatened because of it.
Yeah, my take is not yet, but at least you'll hear a lot of marketing at conferences. It's a very popular buzzword. There's a lot of things that aren't really transformative yet that are still using the AI buzzword to really sell themselves. So I think in that way it could be overhyped. But I think as a technology, it's still going to be very transformative. We're going to see the nature of jobs change over time. And at first, it might just make you more efficient, but over time, I think that slider is going to keep moving and it's going to automate more and more. And we'll have to see how far that can go. So at least that's my take.
So hopefully we'll also have jobs in the future. Let's get now a little bit more specific and take a look at some of the ways we've used AI at Synergex. And Jeff and Tim were both on a team that worked on an AI project at our annual hackathon this past year. And can you guys share a little bit about that project?
Tim, you want to start that?
Yeah, I can kick that off. So we did a hackathon project where we looked at basically fine-tuning a existing model using Hugging Face transformers for synergy. So we took an existing model from Meta called Llama 2, and we did some fine-tuning on it. And we got our goal was to get to a spot where we could effectively help a synergy developer be more effective, kind of like you can go into ChatGPT or Bard or any of these tools right now and ask it to help you with programming on other languages. That you could potentially do that with synergy as well. And that could help you look up docs. It could help verify your code is working the way you expect. It could help you develop overall. Who knows? We could even integrate something with like IntelliCode with SDI. Those are just some of the fantasies around that, but it was more to see what that would actually look like and how much work would be involved. And we got some basic success as far as we prepared some data. You'd be surprised, like just all this data you prepare, even if you ask it the exact same thing that you prepared it, it's not going to answer the same way. It tries to come up with new tokens and a novel response for you essentially. And by the ending, we got it to say something somewhat coherent, but it was definitely not there. It would take a lot more investment.
Yeah. To add into that, the amount of training data that's required in order to make it come up with coherent things is a very, very high amount of high quality training data. So in our case, as a programming language, what we were attempting to make from a training data perspective was like initial prompts and then how you fill them out, or questions and what's an appropriate answer for that, which are probably a little bit too big from a training data perspective. Like they actually probably needed to be a little bit smaller than that, and there needed to be a lot more of them than we were able to come up in the 1-day hackathon that we were performing this task in.
What, Jeff, in your opinion, what would be the feasibility of us providing training a model to write DBL code? What would it take?
Money and lots of interest. That's, those are the primary ingredients here. Anyone can train on anything. That's the lesson we probably should take away from all of the different models that exist out there that are even, not trained by giant megacorps like Meta and OpenAI and others. There are relatively small groups that can make these full LLM models and be pretty successful at it. But it still takes a bunch of money and a bunch of reason for doing it.
Yes. Yeah. Jeff, another question for you. I heard that you've somehow made time to write a book about DBL. Can you tell us about the role that AI played in this process?
It had a lot of role in this process. So we came out of that hackathon project and with the realization of our docs are not particularly consumable by AI. So I started doing some research and found a way to basically write documentation that was consumable by AI easily, and looked at that and was like, I could convert all of our existing docs into this format. Maybe, like, we could probably figure that out. And then I got a little ambitious and decided, you know what? No, I'll just write a whole book and it'll be in this format so that it can be reconsumed by AI after the fact. And maybe that'll be useful. And that was definitely a crazy thought, I would say. But fortunately, AI, my good editor friend, was able to help me in writing all of this voluminous text and examples. Because I don't think my Englishing skills were up to snuff had there not been a constant, never tiring assistant that I could call upon to say, like, I'm trying to write this sentence and it looks like garbage. Could you de-garbage the sentence for me? So a lot of back and forth with AI there. My workflow, what I learned very early on was don't give it big tasks. Like, the smaller the task, the less likely it is to screw it up for you. So, you've got to have you have to keep in mind, if you're writing these large chunks of text, a whole book, you have to keep in mind your own outline and keep all that context in your own head, and then feed it little bits of, can you make this better? Can you reflow this? Tell me about how do other people talk about this topic? And you can synthesize that into something, but ChatGPT by itself is not smart enough to do these things for you. It doesn't really have what we would think of as smarts. It just sort of mimics them.
So don't use ChatGPT to ask it to create a prime number sieve and die ball, is what you're saying, because you're going to get some garbage.
Well, I think for that one in particular, you're definitely going to get some garbage. Yeah, as an example, so once I had written most of the text for the book, and I went back to go write examples, like literal some of the example chapters that exist in there. I attempted to feed back the book contents into ChatGPT and then have it write examples. So at least 75% probably of the actual text that's in the larger examples is ChatGPT generated. So I gave it pretty good instructions, I think, and it wrote most of it. So it can, if you prompt it right, it can write pretty okay DBL. But if you don't know DBL really well, it's gonna sneak some real garbage in there under you.
Python, perhaps.
I used ChatGPT and maybe a year ago just for the heck of it to try it, and said, write hello world in Synergy DBL for me, and it got it remarkably close the first time. But then I started refining it, and at one point the code totally transformed into C#. And it was correct C#. It was a working C# program, but I went back to it and said, you just switched language on me. And it came back and apologized, as it usually does. But the one after that was a working DBL example, but it was hello world.
So interestingly, one of my early attempts at it, I don't remember if it was with ChatGPT or if it was with one of the other models, but I was asking it various program this for me questions, and it was returning some stuff that I was like, this isn't Dieball, you're so far off. And then Steve sent me this old Dieball instruction manual from like 1982 or 76, some sufficiently far away in the past. And Dieball back then didn't look all that much like it does today. And I realized that ChatGPT was answering me in pretty valid, 1976 Dieball. And
pre-ANSI standard.
Right. So they have pretty diverse training sets. Clearly, they don't have a lot of Dieball to go off of. So I think they kind of latched on to 1980, but it learns.
Okay, so this next question's for you, Steve. You've had experience using AI in scripting tasks. Can you share some examples? And obviously, we had a big example yesterday with Dan's session on his Python load testers, but Steve has his own to share.
Yeah, I think like many others here, my main exposure has been with ChatGPT. I've dabbled with a few others, but it's primarily that one. And very much as Dan described in his session yesterday, I primarily use it to help me write code. This can be anything from just a few lines of code to achieve a very simple task. But as my experience with understanding of how AI works and what kind of responses to expect, I'm finding myself frequently using it to produce entire functions these days. I'm frequently involved with several projects that are running concurrently with different customers and different teams right now. Those projects involve working with several programming languages, including Synergy, mainly in the .NET sphere, but not exclusively, C#, Visual Basic, even a small amount of JavaScript and TypeScript. And I've used ChatGPT to help me with all of those. The weakest response, as we've already kind of indicated, is with DBL, and that's mainly because there's not so much information available online as there is about the other languages. But oftentimes when working with DBL, I'm actually working in .NET. So most of the time I can just frame the question as a C# question, and the resulting code is usually pretty similar, if not directly usable. I know we don't maintain the C# to DBL code converter anymore, but it is still in there in Visual Studio, and it does still work in simple cases. And most of the time, if I do need to, I can take a piece of C# that I've got from there and drop it in the translator and come up with DBL code. My current projects also require me to work on multiple operating systems. So recently I've been working on Windows, Linux, OpenVMS, and even a bit of Android a little while back. And another thing I frequently use ChatGPT for is to help me write scripts for the operating system, whether it's Windows batch files or PowerShell or Linux bash or C Shell. It generally does a really awesome job of all of those things. Again, because there's tons of documentation out there on the internet. One thing that really blew me away is how good it is at writing OpenVMS DCL command procedure code. I guess it's not surprising for the reasons we just talked about that OpenVMS has been super well documented online since the dawn of the internet. So there's lots of information out there, and it does a great job of that. I've also been doing quite a lot of work recently in the SQL replication code base, and again, AI has done a great job of helping me get to grips with new concepts in SQL, as well as using new frameworks like Microsoft SQL Client that I wasn't familiar with. At this point, I use ChatGPT literally every day, sometimes every hour, and it's literally become my first port of call for almost any question. But you do have to learn to recognize when it's not doing a good job, because it will produce a response, but that response may or may not be correct. I've never once seen it respond with, "I'm sorry, I can't help you with that." It always comes up with something, whether it's right or wrong. But on many occasions, I've encountered responses that were just plain wrong, and then I revert to Google and Stack Overflow and all of the other places that we all used to go to. I guess the main things I've learned during the process are think very carefully about what the question is that you ask. The better the question, the better the chance of an accurate answer. And as Jeff already suggested, keep it simple if you can, but be clear about what you're asking for, and specify detail as much as you can. Also interact with the AI, as Dan mentioned yesterday. Once you've asked a question, the context of that question and the response and the whole stream of responses is maintained. So if you ask a follow-up question, it's always in the context of things that have happened previously within that conversation. So it's absolutely possible to guide the AI iteratively to improve the quality of a response. But if you see something that's not correct, but if you see something that's not correct, do tell the AI, tell it this is not correct because, and it will learn from that. When you do this, in my experience, one of two things is going to happen. Either the response is going to get better next time, or it may not. And if it doesn't, I immediately give up. If I recognize that I've corrected it and it's getting worse, or it still didn't correct it, in my experience, chances are you're not going to get a good response, and it's time to go to Google. I guess the final thing I'll mention is that the free version 3.5 is great if you're asking about things that have been around for a long time, but its data is at least 2 years stale at this point. So if you want information about new things, the paid version is way better. At first, I thought $20 a month was kind of steep per person, but having subscribed for the last couple of months, it makes a huge difference and likely produces that value of the monthly fee pretty much every day that I use it. These things are far from perfect, and it will be a long time before they can even come close to replacing actual developers. But when you use them appropriately, it's a very valuable tool and absolutely makes me more productive. That's my sort of input on the subject.
GPT-4o came out this week, which I might cancel my paid subscription to OpenAI because that has the most up-to-date data.
Right. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play with it an awful lot, but one thing I did notice immediately is it is way faster.
It is way faster.
Awesome.
I can't wrap my head around why they would do that in the free version, but God bless them. It would be nice to save some money, I guess.
Right.
The other reason I got the paid subscription, I think some of us did as well, is for DALL-E. You guys might have seen some DALL-E-inspired images throughout this conference. And I'm curious if anybody in the chat wants to put in what other tools they're using aside from GPT. And I know Tim, Jeff, Steve, you've got some other tools you've got using, so I'd be curious to hear about those.
For image generation, I only ever use ChatGPT / DALL-E. It generates a lot of hot garbage most of the time, but fun and exciting and interesting hot garbage usually. I subscribe to the OpenAI. I pay the $20 for that. The $20 for Anthropic, their Claude model, is also pretty good. And GitHub Copilot. So a lot of, times when it's really helpful to generate text inside of your IDE for various reasons. Copilot is there for you for that.
I keep asking Jeff to turn on Copilot, Microsoft Copilot for me so I can get better at Excel, but we haven't figured out how to do it yet. Jeff has taken over IT responsibilities recently, so
it's somewhere on the to-do list to figure out.
It's somewhere on the to-do list. Turn it on. Yeah. Tim, are you using anything else?
ChatGPT is probably the big one. I've used a little bit of Copilot and some of the other tools just to kind of compare and just be familiar with what's out in the market. But I do feel the most comfortable just going to ChatGPT right now as well. And I'm also using Premium myself.
Tim was looking through some resumes for an open sysadmin job that we have yesterday, and he was telling me, "Oh, ChatGPT said to disqualify this and person and qualify this person in." So it's kind of ingenious the way that people are finding ways to use it. I get a lot less calls from Jeff now because I used to help him turn things into English, and he doesn't need me anymore. So
one thing that really did surprise me, because I enjoy using ChatGPT so much, and I've not had a great experience with Copilot so far, at least in the places that I encountered it initially, which were in Microsoft Edge and Bing, and they kind of force it down your throat, and I found it super frustrating. Because it would just launch into an AI response, and the speed was just so frustrating. It actually caused me to move back to Chrome and back to Google. I got so frustrated with it.
I don't think they do themselves any service here by, if you think back to the day when Microsoft would name things and everything was called COM something, and then absolutely everything was .NET. And now absolutely everything is Copilot. And there's a whole bunch of very distinct products there. So when I talk about Copilot, personally, I'm talking about Copilot in Visual Studio Code. So I'm typing and it gives you this, fill in AI response thing. It's not like I'm really prompting it. It's just offering me suggestions as I type. The Copilot Steve's talking about is the unfortunately similarly branded thing that they've shoved into Edge that I'm not a big fan of. And then there's yet another still Copilot, the one that Rachel is asking me to turn on, which is Copilot similar, I guess, to the one that we use in VS Code. But, the outputs are obviously very different and integrated into Office products. Which I think of the three of them, 2 out of 3 of them seem like hits. Chuck has given a positive review of it here in the chat. So maybe they could come up with different names for different variants. That would
So the VS Code one is called GitHub Copilot specifically. That's the one I have experience using. I know the is Bing Chat also called Copilot now also?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess the advantage of that one is Microsoft's managing the data you're entering, so they're trying to say that they're not going to use it for training like OpenAI might. So then you may be able to submit more of your actual company data instead of just asking questions. But that's another reason we need Copilot or GitHub Copilot or something that we can have more secure. That's not going to just be used for training data.
By the way.
Sorry, I was going to say, Ridwan, I'm so happy to hear that you're using Copilot and Synergy and Visual Studio and getting some positive results from that. Everybody should try that.
Interesting.
But later he says not always consistent, but often positively surprised. So that's where that's what I'm focused on.
I was just going to say that if anybody else has had similar frustrations in trying to not use Edge, Windows 11 kind of forces it down your throat because even though you set the default browser to something else, you search from the Windows search box, it's going to pop up Edge still and several other places in the operating system. If that's a frustration that you're having, there is a really excellent plugin that is available on GitHub. It's called MS Edge Redirect. and if you install that, it intercepts all of those places and redirects to your default browser.
I'm going to get to some higher level questions now, and this is for everybody. Are there any emerging AI technologies or trends that you are particularly excited about?
Faster is real nice, actually. So the fact that GPT-4 is as much faster than GPT-4o is as much faster as it is means that there's a bunch of use cases that are kind of unlocked that used to be really frustrating.
Yeah,
like the amount of time you had to wait. Yeah, it becomes a lot more conversational. And the things you're willing to ask it when it's only going to take like 5 or 10 seconds to generate your output are different than the ones that you're going to ask it when it takes like almost a minute.
Keith just threw a question in here. Jeff, do you want to describe some of the interesting results you saw when, after trying to attempt to train the model you had worked on in the hackathon, and anything that stuck out to you?
I mean, it was a pretty high quality hallucinator when we were done fine tuning it. I would say in our 1-day hackathon, like the output we produced was predominantly hallucination and not consistent text.
Yeah, nothing useful. Jeff and I were actually sitting there before our demo and we just kept trying different prompts to see, like, can we get one example that actually is coherent? And we eventually hit one that it formed the complete sentence that actually explained something from the data we provided it. So I would not say it did anything particularly well. You'd probably be better off using like ChatGPT and training your own GPT with some like pre-prompt information in your session.
So, definitely. Like I have gotten much better results out of backfeeding the DBL book into ChatGPT as a my GPT thing than we got fine tuning. There's workloads where you have to fine tune in order to make it like understand as opposed to just rote respond back to you. But on the entry level, it is so much better to feed it into ChatGPT directly than it is to try and actually fine tune a model.
Right. And you can get a lot of the benefits of fine tuning without actually having to do any fine tuning, just by pre-feeding it the right information before you even ask your question. That's the whole reason why ChatGPT even became so revolutionary. Like, there's been AI tools around for years, even before it caught on in like 2022. But the big thing that made ChatGPT stand out was the token data and the session context, where now you can build up prompt after prompt, can build more information, and you can get better responses as a result. So if you need something with Synergy, just go into a GPT session, or I'm sure you can do that with other tools now as well. And basically just you can provide that data and have it even learn that about your profile, or have it learn that as a specific GPT. And then you can use that and have better results. And maybe even feed in Jeff's book, for example.
Has there been any instances where GPT just didn't work as you thought it would? And I think anyone that's played with Dolly has gotten some very interesting images, in the way that it just does not know how to handle writing. Words is also fascinating. But yeah, have any of you encountered anything interesting?
If you're too strongly opinionated, it can actually shape the results based on your opinion. So it's not always going to give you fact. It's a language model. It's not amazing at math. It's gotten better with the Python scripts it runs, but it's not amazing at math. It's not really an objective source of truth. So that's one thing to watch out for, is you can tell it something, like Steve mentioned, it'll always give you a result. Sometimes it's completely wrong, but it's telling you that with 100% confidence. So you can be led astray really easily. And also, if you're pushing it too hard, I've seen examples where someone's convinced it that 2 + 2 = 5, just because they've pressured it so hard that it'll change facts to what it tells you. So
yeah,
something to watch out for.
There was one specific example, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I believe I was trying to interact with an OpenID Connect server for authentication using a library that I haven't used before. And I was surprised because it was millions and millions of downloads of this thing on NuGet, and I really expected it to be accurate. And it came up with answers that just looked correct. It all looked right. You create this object, you set this, you do that, you do this. And I iterated and iterated and iterated 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And it came up with answers that on every occasion looked correct, but none of them worked. And eventually I just gave up. So that's the worst experience I've had.
I would say there are some API designs that are more AI friendly than others. Like some programming languages, some APIs, ChatGPT just can't really figure it out because they're not very consistent, right? Like if your API is super inconsistent, ChatGPT is not going to understand the nuance of use this, not that. It's just, it's a text model. It's spewing out what it thinks it should put out as the next word. It doesn't have some like higher level planning around the nuance of your API. I think I would add in, sorry, Steve, I believe this was your first usage of ChatGPT, and I'm going to say it didn't work out well and probably isn't a good use case as my answer. I think your first question to ChatGPT was, what are they building in place of the gas station on the corner of Foothill and whatever that East Roseville Parkway or something like that. And it was like, it hallucinated some really insane stuff. You're muted.
No, you're right. Turns out it was a car wash, but it came up with, I don't know where it got it from, but it was complete nonsense. But again, it was on the 3.5 2-year-old model. It had no way of knowing any of that stuff.
It couldn't possibly have known, but it didn't let on to that fact at all.
Yep. No, it's one of these. It's like, no, it's not.
It might actually be able to answer that now with like GPT-4, since they can look online. But they'll probably be hit or miss still.
All right, I've got a final question for all of you. We've talked about how AI has changed the way you're developing software already. What are your predictions for how AI will shape software development in the future?
So I think there was an example that somebody showed with Bard where someone uploaded their entire code base into Bard. So like they had like 100,000 files, something crazy, and then they gave it an acceptance criteria. So they gave it a user story, acceptance criteria, and then they asked it like make a PR. And then it went and it made like a pull, like it basically made a pull request with all those changes. And I've also seen that, like I know some people might have seen like the whole Devin, like your AI programmer. I'm not sure how actually legitimate that was, but we'll probably see more things like that where it's like, who knows, in 10 years you can just feed into a code base and then ask it to come up with a PR and it'll just create the PR for you based on the AC.
If your request is small enough, I could see that happening. The problem is it's not good at making choices. It's good at replicating what it thinks it's seen before and synthesizing from complex inputs. Like it has no decision-making capabilities, not really, and it hallucinates. So if you're letting it do PRs into your code base, it's like you have a incredibly knowledgeable, hyperactive junior dev with absolutely no supervision and no judgment skills whatsoever. So I would say my prediction is AI is going to simultaneously make life really nice and kind of sucky for junior devs, right? The amount of work that a junior dev can put out is probably not going to go up by too much. They might be able to learn faster, but an AI assisted junior dev, they are not adding the missing part of that equation. The experience and the understanding and the decision making, they don't have those yet. And ChatGPT can only bring them this is how you use this API, this is how you write this code, this is how you do this algorithm, which is helpful, but they don't really know how to apply it yet. And so the gap between an entry-level programmer and what you would typically have in the past maybe referred to as like a 10x dev, it's going to get bigger. It's not going to be 10x anymore. Like if you have a really, really good programmer who has great decision-making skills, AI is the awesomest automatic hammer that you ever did find for pounding in nails. But it's down to who's wielding it. So it's going to be harder for junior devs, I think, because they're going to be compared against these programmers who are like 100 times more productive than them. And they're going to have to race through that sort of productivity landmine thing in order to get somewhere where they're actually bringing value.
And I think that's almost true right now. And we're going to get closer to that in the next year or two. But the way I was seeing it was almost like 10 years from now. We don't know if it's going to keep exponentially growing at the same rate, if it's going to hit a wall. Like there isn't a phenomenon where basically all these language models, their training gets worse if they start training on AI output, essentially. So there's some risk that if too many of these models flood the internet with data, that it's going to be more difficult to continue to train future models and to keep improving at the same rate we've improved already. So I'm sure a lot of companies are just on gold mines of hoards of data that they can continue to use to do that training. But I wonder if that is going to impact this, and we're not going to see the same trajectory in 10 years, and it could slow down. I'm not sure yet. We'll have to see if there's enough data or enough way to filter out all the AI content to still have valuable training data.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks, everyone, for having a lively chat with us. And we have a very brief 2-minute final presentation to share. And if anybody has any final questions real quick, if they want to throw them in there. Hi again, everyone. My name is Rachel Gibson, and I am the Director of Sales and Marketing at Synergex. I want to start out by saying a big thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend our virtual conference. We believe that investments that you're making into your systems reap major benefits, and those investments include the time that you spent with us this week. We have some other big thank yous to deliver to those that made this conference a success. Our keynote speaker, Billy Hollis, delivered another thought-provoking keynote address that I'm sure hits close to home for many of you. It takes a village to put on a successful conference. Thank you to all of our presenters and moderators for making this event enjoyable and informative. We had some help behind the scenes as well. Lauren and Julia set up our registrations and website, while Steve set up our entire recording studio. Cindy, who was promoted to marketing manager last year, oversaw all the organization and project management that goes into this. Linda, our tech writer, handled presentation review, and Heather, the hero of this conference, took care of most of the legwork, all things graphics, communications, coordination, filming, conference platform, and more. Here's how things look behind the scenes in our Gold River office. Again, big thank you to Steve for setting everything up. Here's a quick recap of everything we've covered in this conference. Our goal with all of these topics and with these conferences in general is to equip you with the knowledge needed to take your DBL applications into the future. Thanks again for taking the time to attend this year's Dev Partner Conference. We look forward to seeing you next year in person in Denver.